Imagine someone snoozing on a specially made bed 77,000 years ago in a South African cave. People in ancient Peru were happily munching on popcorn that's at least 7,600 years old. And get this, folks, in what's now Turkey were checking their reflections in super shiny volcanic rock a mind-boggling 8,000 years ago, long before glass mirrors were a thing. Ancient Egyptians even had their own version of toothpaste and tooth cleaning sticks around 3,500 BC. Number 11. Pants that rode horses before they walked into your wardrobe. It's easy to think of pants or trousers as just something we wear every day, but their story starts way back, specifically with people who spent a lot of time on horseback. The oldest known pair of trousers ever found were discovered in the Yanghai tombs in Turpan, Tunjiang, which is in western China. These particular pants are dated to be between 3,000 and 3,300 years old. They weren't made for strolling down the street. They were designed for riding horses. Imagine trying to ride a horse in a long robe or tunic. Not very practical, right? That's why these early pants came into being. People who wore them were likely nomadic herders or warriors who depended on horses for their way of life. These ancient trousers were made of wool, a common material at the time. Construction was quite clever. They consisted of 3 pieces of wool cloth. 2 pieces were for the legs, and a third wider piece was for the crotch area, designed to allow for comfortable movement while straddling a horse. What's really neat is that these trousers weren't just plain. They had woven patterns on them, suggesting that even back then, people cared about how their clothes looked. As horse riding spread, so did the idea of wearing pants. Groups like the Scythians, Celts, and various Germanic tribes, all known for their equestrian skills, adopted trousers. The ancient Greeks and Romans, on the other hand, initially saw pants as something foreign, even barbaric. They preferred their togas and tunics. However, as the Roman Empire expanded into colder northern territories, Roman soldiers started wearing trousers which they called braccae to keep warm and for practicality in rough terrain. Over centuries, what started as specialized gear for horse riders slowly transformed into a common garment for men in many parts of the world, eventually leading to the wide variety of styles we see today. From formal dress pants to casual jeans, the journey of pants is a long one. From the steppes of Central Asia to closets everywhere. Number 10. Flush toilets that were around before your great-great-great-grandparents. The idea of a toilet that flushes away waste with water isn't a modern marvel. It's an ancient innovation. Over 4,000 years ago, around 2000 BC, the Minoan civilization on the island of Crete had surprisingly advanced plumbing. Palace of Knossos, archaeologists have found evidence of latrines with channels that could be flushed with water. These systems used terracotta pipes to carry water to and from the toilet areas. Similarly, in the ancient settlement of Akrotiri on the island of Santorini, which was part of the Minoan sphere, remnants of sophisticated drainage and toilet systems have been unearthed, preserved under volcanic ash. These weren't isolated experiments. Around the same time, or even a bit earlier, around 2500 BC, cities in the Indus Valley civilization like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa in modern-day Pakistan also had remarkably well-planned sanitation. Many houses had dedicated bathing areas and toilets made of brick, with chutes that led waste away to covered drains or cesspits lining the streets. The Romans, famous for their engineering, took public sanitation to another level. They built large public latrines, often with many seats side by side where running water constantly flowed beneath to carry waste away into their impressive sewer system, the Cloaca Maxima. Wealthy Romans also had private toilets in their homes. After the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe saw a decline in such sophisticated sanitation for many centuries. People often resorted to chamber pots or garderobes in castles, which were basically shafts that emptied outside the castle walls. It wasn't until much later that the concept of the flushing toilet was revisited. In 1596, Sir John Harington, a godson of Queen Elizabeth I, designed a flushing water closet for her, but it didn't catch on widely. The real game changer came in 1775 when Alexander Cumming, a Scottish watchmaker, patented the S-trap. This S-shaped pipe beneath the toilet bowl traps a small amount of water, creating a seal that prevents sewer gases from entering the bathroom. Joseph Brema, an inventor and locksmith, improved on Cumming's design in 1778. Public awareness and adoption grew significantly after plumber George Jennings installed his public conveniences at the Great Exhibition in London in 1851, where people could pay a penny to use them. While often associated with the name, Thomas Crapper didn't invent the flush toilet, but he was a prominent plumber who held several patents for plumbing improvements in the late 19th century and helped popularize sanitary fixtures. Number 9. Toothpaste and toothbrushes that cleaned ancient smiles. Keeping teeth clean is not a new obsession. Ancient Egyptians, as far back as 3500 to 3000 BC, were already using early forms of toothbrushes and toothpaste. Before toothbrushes with bristles were invented, people used chew sticks. These were small twigs or branches from specific plants, often with frayed ends. One end would be chewed until the fibers separated, forming a sort of brush, which was then used to rub against the teeth. The other end, sometimes sharpened, could be used as a toothpick. Evidence of these chew sticks has been found in Egyptian tombs. Alongside these cleaning tools, ancient Egyptians also concocted their own versions of toothpaste. Recipes for tooth powders have been discovered on papyrus. One such recipe from the 4th century AD, found in a collection of Greek papyri, details a mixture of crushed rock, salt, mint, dried iris flower, and grains of pepper. These ingredients were ground together to create a powder that would have been rubbed onto the teeth, likely with a finger or a chew stick. The Romans also had their own oral hygiene practices. They used chew sticks and various tooth powders with ingredients that sometimes included crushed bones, eggshells, and oyster shells for their abrasive qualities. To freshen breath, they might add powdered charcoal or bark. In ancient China, people also used chew sticks, often from aromatic tree twigs, to clean their teeth and freshen their breath. The bristle toothbrush, more recognizable to us, is believed to have originated in China during the Tang Dynasty, 619 to 907 AD. These early bristle toothbrushes were made with hog bristles attached to a handle made of bone or bamboo. Travelers and traders eventually brought this invention to Europe, though it wasn't widely adopted immediately. Horsehair was sometimes used for bristles in Europe, but it was considered too soft by some, while boar bristles were firmer. It took until the late 18th and early 19th centuries for toothbrush use to become more common in the West, and the first mass-produced toothbrush was made by William Addis in England around 1780. Nylon bristles, which we commonly use today, were only introduced in 1938, changing toothbrush manufacturing forever. Number 8. Popcorn that was popping thousands of years ago. That crunchy, airy snack we love at the movies has an incredibly long history, stretching back much further than most people realize. Archaeologists have found evidence that people were eating popcorn in Peru as early as 7,600 years ago. Tiny, ancient cobs of popcorn, remarkably well preserved, were discovered in the Peridones and Huaca Prieta sites in northern Peru. These cobs are different from the corn we typically eat as corn on the cob. They are specifically from popcorn varieties. Researchers analyzed these ancient corn remnants and found that they were indeed pop. Further evidence from New Mexico in a place called the Bat Cave showed that people were popping corn there around 5,600 years ago. The cobs found there were also clearly varieties that would burst open when heated. So how did ancient people pop corn without microwaves or fancy air poppers? They had several methods. One way was to toast the kernels directly in the embers of a fire. Another method involved heating sand in a fire and then stirring the corn kernels into the hot sand until they pop. They also used pottery. Archaeologists have found ancient shallow ceramic vessels that could have been placed over a fire with kernels inside, covered perhaps with another piece of pottery or a flat stone to keep the popping corn contained. Popcorn wasn't just a snack for these ancient cultures. It also held ceremonial and decorative significance. For instance, the Aztecs, who came much later in Mesoamerica, used popcorn not only for food but also to adorn statues of their gods and in ritual ceremonies. They had a specific word for popcorn, momochitl, and it featured in their art and religious practices. When European explorers arrived in the Americas, they encountered popcorn being used by various indigenous peoples. Christopher Columbus noted its use by Native Americans in the Caribbean. Later, colonists in North America learned about popcorn from indigenous groups like the Iroquois, who had been cultivating and popping corn for centuries. Gradually spread in popularity, becoming a common snack food in the United States by the 19th century, especially after the invention of a mobile steam-powered popcorn maker by Charles Cretors in the 1890s, which made it a familiar sight at fairs, circuses, and eventually movie theaters. Number 7. Mirrors that showed reflections long before glass. The desire to see one's own reflection is ancient, and people found ways to do it long before glass mirrors were invented. The earliest known manufactured mirrors date back around 8,000 years to about 6,000 BC in Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey. These weren't made of glass, but of polished obsidian, a type of naturally occurring volcanic glass. Archaeologists at sites like Çatalhöyük have unearthed these obsidian mirrors. They were created by taking pieces of this dark, glassy rock and carefully grinding and polishing them until they had a highly reflective, albeit dark, surface. These were luxury items, likely status symbols, and quite small compared to modern mirrors. Producing such a smooth, reflective surface from hard stone would have required considerable skill and effort. Similar polished stone mirrors have been found in ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, dating back to around 4,000 to 3,000 BC. The Egyptians, for example, made mirrors from polished copper or bronze. These metal mirrors were typically round and often had ornate handles made of wood, ivory, or metal, sometimes shaped like papyrus plants or figures of gods and goddesses. They were valuable possessions, frequently buried with their owners. These early mirrors wouldn't have given the perfectly clear, bright reflection we're used to today. Polished stone would have been dark, and polished metal would tarnish and require frequent repolishing to maintain its reflectivity. The reflections would have been softer perhaps, a bit distorted, but clear enough to see one's features. In ancient China, mirrors were also made from polished bronze, and they became very important culturally, often decorated with intricate designs and inscriptions on the back. Some were believed to have protective powers. The Romans also used polished metal mirrors, typically made of silvered bronze. The breakthrough towards mirrors as we know them came much later. While the Romans knew how to make glass, coating glass with a metallic backing to create a mirror was a development that occurred gradually. Small glass mirrors with a backing of lead were being made in Roman Egypt in the 1st century AD. However, it wasn't until the Renaissance, specifically in Venice around the 16th century, that the process of backing glass with a tin mercury amalgam was perfected. This produced much clearer and more reflective mirrors than ever before, making Venetian mirrors famous and highly sought after throughout Europe. The modern process of silvering glass was invented in the 19th century. Number 6. Dice that were rolled in ancient tombs. Those little spotted cubes we use for board games and gambling have been around for an astonishingly long time. Some of the oldest dice ever discovered were found in a Bronze Age settlement in southeastern Iran known as Shar-e-Supte, or the Burnt City. These dice, dating back to around 3,200 to 2,900 BC, that's over 5,000 years ago, were part of a complete backgammon-like board game set, which also included a rectangular wooden board and 60 playing pieces. The dice themselves were cubical, made of human bone or clay, with dots marking the sides similar to modern dice. Dice have also been found in ancient Egyptian tombs. Some of these, dating as far back as 2000 BC, were not always six-sided cubes. Some were four-sided, stick-like dice or knuckle bones, astragali, which are actual ankle bones of sheep or goats. These knuckle bones naturally have four distinct sides and were used for games of chance long before cubical dice became common. Even when cubical dice appeared, the arrangement of spots wasn't always standardized as it is today, where opposite sides add up to 7. Early dice show various arrangements. In ancient India, dice games are mentioned in sacred texts like the Rigveda and the Mahabharata, suggesting their importance in both recreation and sometimes high-stakes situations. The game of Pasa, played with oblong four-sided dice, was a central theme in the epic Mahabharata, where a kingdom was lost over a game. The ancient Greeks and Romans were also avid dice players. They used both knuckle bones, called astragoi by the Greeks and tali by the Romans, and cubical dice, kiboi by the Greeks, tesserae by the Romans. Dice games were popular in Roman taverns and among soldiers. Gambling with dice was technically illegal in Rome except during the Saturnalia festival, but this law was widely ignored. Roman dice were often made of bone, ivory, wood, stone, or metal. Archaeologists have found many Roman dice, and interestingly, some appear to have been subtly altered, suggesting that cheating in dice games is also an ancient practice. The spots, or pips, on dice were typically carved out and sometimes filled with a different material for contrast. The enduring design of the six-sided die, with its simple pips, has made it a timeless tool for games and divination across countless cultures and millennia. Number 5. Shoes that protected feet over 5 kunle ago. Walking around barefoot might seem natural, but humans started protecting their feet with footwear a very, very long time ago. Oldest known leather shoe in the world is a remarkably well-preserved moccasin-like shoe found in a cave in Armenia called Areni 1. This shoe is about 5,500 years old, dating back to around 3,500 BC. It was made from a single piece of cowhide, tanned and shaped to fit a foot, and it was laced up at the front and back. It was stuffed with grass, possibly for insulation or to maintain its shape. This Armenian shoe is an amazing find because leather usually rots away over such long periods. But the cool, dry conditions of the cave along with a covering of sheep dung helped preserve it. People were wearing shoes even before that. Sandals, which are simpler in construction, have an even older history. A pair of sandals woven from sagebrush bark, found in Fort Rock Cave, Oregon in the United States, have been dated to be around 10,000 years old. These show incredible skill in weaving plant fibers to create functional footwear. Different ancient cultures developed different types of shoes based on their climate and needs. Ancient Egyptians, for example, wore sandals made from papyrus or palm leaves. These were common for everyday wear, and you can see them depicted in many Egyptian paintings and reliefs. More elaborate sandals, sometimes with gold embellishments, were worn by royalty and the wealthy. In colder climates, people needed more substantial footwear. Otzi the Iceman, the natural mummy found in the Alps who lived around 3300 BC, roughly a contemporary of the owner of the Armenian shoe, was wearing sophisticated shoes designed for walking in snow and cold weather. His shoes had bearskin soles, deerskin uppers, and a netting made of tree bark. Inside he had a layer of grass, much like the Armenian shoe for insulation and cushioning. The Romans developed various types of footwear, including sandals soli, closed shoes, calce, and military boots, caligae, with hobnailed soles for durability and traction. Type of shoe a Roman wore could also indicate their social status. For many centuries, shoes were handmade by cobblers, each pair crafted individually. It wasn't until the 19th century that shoe manufacturing began to be industrialized, allowing for mass production and making a wider variety of styles more accessible to more people. Number 4. Locks and keys that secured ancient treasures. The need to keep belongings safe and control access to spaces is not new. Simple locks and keys have been around for thousands of years. Some of the earliest known examples of lock mechanisms come from ancient Egypt, dating back as far as 4,000 years ago, around 2000 BC. These were large wooden pin tumbler locks. The basic principle is quite clever. A wooden bolt in the door could be secured by a set of wooden pins that dropped into holes drilled in the bolt. To open it, a large wooden key, often shaped like a giant toothbrush with pegs at one end, was inserted into a slot. When the key was lifted, its pegs would push the pins up, freeing the bolt so it could be slid open. These Egyptian locks were quite large, sometimes several feet long, and so were their keys. Similar wooden pin tumbler locks were also used in other ancient cultures. For example, a lock of this type was found in the palace of Sargon II in Khorsabad, Assyria, modern-day Iraq, dating to around 700 BC. The ancient Greeks also used locks, though their mechanisms were often simpler, sometimes involving just a bolt that could be moved from the outside, using a curved metal key inserted through a small hole in the door. The Romans made significant advancements in lock technology. They were skilled metalworkers and developed smaller, more complex locks made of iron and bronze. Roman locks often used a version of the pin tumbler principle but also introduced warded locks. In a warded lock, internal obstacles, words, prevent the wrong key from turning. Correct key has notches cut into it that correspond to the wards, allowing it to pass them and engage the bolt. Roman keys were often made of bronze or iron and could be quite ornate. Some were small enough to be worn on a finger like a ring, indicating that the owner had access to something valuable or important. Padlocks also have ancient origins, with examples found in Roman and Chinese archaeological sites. These early padlocks used various mechanisms, including spring-loaded catches. The fundamental principles of many of these ancient lock designs, particularly the pin tumbler and warded mechanisms, continued to be used for centuries, forming the basis for lock technology well into the medieval period and beyond. The desire for security spurred these early inventions, paving the way for the sophisticated locking systems we rely on today. Number 3. Mucku that graced faces thousands of years ago. Using cosmetics to enhance or alter appearance is an ancient practice with roots stretching back to some of the earliest civilizations. One of the most well-known examples comes from ancient Egypt, where both men and women used makeup extensively, starting around 4000 BC. Kohl, a dark powder, was famously used as eyeliner and to darken eyelashes and eyebrows. It was typically made from galena, a lead sulfide or stibnite, and antimony sulfide, ground into a fine powder and mixed with oil or fat to create a paste. This was applied using a small stick made of wood, ivory, or bone. The Egyptians believed kohl had magical and protective properties. In addition to its aesthetic appeal, they thought it could ward off eye infections, and some lead-based compounds did have anti-medieing properties, though also toxic ones, and protect the eyes from the harsh sun glare. Green eye makeup, made from powdered malachite, a copper carbonate mineral, was also popular, especially in earlier periods. Beyond eye makeup, Egyptians used red ochre, a natural clay pigment, to create lipstick and rouge for their cheeks. These cosmetics were stored in special pots and jars, often beautifully crafted from materials like alabaster or faience. In ancient Mesopotamia, around 3000 BC, Sumerian women were using cosmetics. Evidence suggests they crushed gemstones to create colorful powders for their lips and eyes. Queen Pubi of Ur, whose tomb dates to about 2600 BC, was buried with a cosmetics set made of gold, indicating the value placed on these items. The ancient Greeks and Romans also used makeup, though attitudes towards it varied. Greek women used white lead powder to lighten their complexion, a dangerous practice, and charcoal for eyeliner. Roman women used various substances, including chalk for a pale face fucus, a type of red dye from lichen or plants, for rouge, and lipstick and kohl or soot for darkening eyes. They also had preparations to smooth skin and hide blemishes. In ancient China, women used rice powder to whiten their faces and various plant-based dyes for lips and fingernails. During some dynasties, specific styles of makeup, like painting flower patterns on the forehead, became fashionable. The ingredients and styles of makeup have evolved dramatically over millennia, but the fundamental human interest in adorning the face and body is clearly a very old tradition, tied to beauty, status, and ritual across many cultures. Number 2. Chewing gum that was chewed in the Stone Age. The habit of chewing on something non-nutritive for enjoyment or other reasons goes back much further than you might think, even into the Stone Age. The oldest known chewing gum is a lump of birch bark tar that was chewed by a Neolithic person around 9,000 years ago. This piece was found in Kierikki, Finland. Birch bark tar is made by heating birch bark, and it has antiseptic properties. Ancient people likely chewed it for several reasons, perhaps to relieve toothaches, as a sort of primitive tooth cleaner, or simply for pleasure, much like modern gum. Birch bark tar chews have been found at various prehistoric sites across Europe. For example, a piece from western Sweden was found with tooth imprints from a teenager who lived about 9,700 years ago. Another piece found in Denmark, dated to about 5,700 years ago, even contained ancient human DNA, allowing scientists to learn about the person who chewed it, a female with dark skin, dark hair, and blue eyes, whose last meal likely included duck and hazelnuts. The ancient Greeks also chewed a substance called mastic, which is a resin from the mastic tree native to the Mediterranean. They chewed it to clean their teeth and freshen their breath. The Greek physician and botanist Dioscorides mentioned the properties of mastic resin in his writings in the 1st century AD. Native Americans in various parts of North and Central America also had their own chewing traditions. For instance, people in New England chewed the resin from spruce trees. The Mayans chewed chicle, which is the latex sap from the sapodilla tree. Chicle is a key ingredient in early modern chewing gums. The idea of commercial chewing gum as we know it today began to take shape in the 19th century. In the 1860s, an American inventor named Thomas Adams was trying to use chicle as a rubber substitute. His experiments failed, but he noticed that people were chewing chicle in its natural form. He decided to try adding flavoring to it and selling it as Adams New York Gum No. 1. It was unflavored, but became popular. Later, he added licorice flavoring to create blackjack gum, one of the first flavored gums. Other entrepreneurs followed, experimenting with different flavors and marketing strategies. William Wrigley Jr. started out selling soap and baking powder, offering chewing gum as a premium, but the gum became more popular than his main products, leading him to focus on gum manufacturing with brands like Juicy Fruit and Wrigley's Spearmint. So while the flavors and packaging have changed, the simple act of chewing something for pleasure or oral hygiene has an incredibly long and sticky history. Number 1. Beds that provided comfort tens of thousands of years ago. The idea of having a dedicated, comfortable place to sleep is not a modern luxury. It's an ancient human practice. Some of the earliest evidence for what could be called a bed comes from the Sibudu Cave in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. Archaeologists there found layers of plant material, specifically sedges, rushes, and grasses, that were intentionally laid down as sleeping mats. Oldest of these layers dates back an astonishing 77,000 years. These plant-based sleeping surfaces were not just simple piles. They were constructed in layers, sometimes up to a foot thick. What's particularly interesting is that the people who made these beds also incorporated aromatic leaves from a type of river wild quince. These leaves contain natural insect-repelling compounds, suggesting that these ancient sleepers were not only seeking comfort, but also trying to keep biting insects like mosquitoes away. These plant beds were periodically burned, possibly to get rid of pests and to clear space for fresh bedding. This shows a level of planning and understanding of materials that is quite sophisticated for such an early period. Fast forward many millennia, and we see more structured beds appearing. In ancient Egypt, around 3100 BC, raised beds became common, at least for the wealthy. These beds were made of wood and were elevated off the ground, which helped to avoid drafts, dirt, and pests like snakes or rodents. Some Egyptian beds were simple rectangular frames with legs, often with a woven mat or animal skins placed on top for comfort. More elaborate versions had headboards and footboards, sometimes decorated with carvings or inlays of ivory and ebony. Tutankhamun, the famous boy pharaoh, had several beds in his tomb, including one made of gilded wood. Ancient Greeks and Romans also had beds, called klein by the Greeks. These were often more than just sleeping furniture. They also served as couches for dining and socializing, especially for men during symposia, drinking parties. Roman beds, or lecti, ranged from simple wooden frames for ordinary people to luxurious versions made of bronze or wood, adorned with silver, gold, or ivory, and topped with soft mattresses stuffed with feathers, wool, or straw. Throughout the Middle Ages in Europe, beds for the wealthy became increasingly ornate, often with heavy wooden frames, canopies, and curtains for warmth and privacy. Poorer people usually slept on simpler pallets or straw-filled mattresses on the floor or on basic frames. Concept of a dedicated sleeping structure designed for comfort and protection has clearly been part of human life for a very, very long time.